Good morning, future teachers, mathematicians of our university, the BSE 3B students. Today, you will be learning the Unit 1 and Unit 2 of our subject, SEM 15 Assessment and Evaluation in Mathematics. Mathematics experience. I would like you to ask this question. When and where did you start learning mathematics? I'll be giving you time to think, to go back. When and where did you start learning mathematics? Because you are about to begin exploring how to teach mathematics. But in reality, you are not a beginner. You already have a wealth of experience of mathematics education upon which to draw. Whether you have studied mathematics at degree level or not, you will have spent many hours of your life engaged in learning and using mathematics. The teacher's view of mathematics is shaped to a very large extent by his or her own mathematical experience as a student, according to Dorfler and McLeod, 1986. Indeed, not only will these experiences inform your views on the nature of mathematics, but they will also influence your personal philosophy about mathematics education. It is a valuable exercise. Then, at the beginning of your course, to look back and reflect on where you have come from. So, the aims of education. While you are learning to teach mathematics, you may feel that you have more important priorities than considering the somewhat abstract issues of the nature of mathematics and the purpose of education. You may quite reasonably wish to focus instead on surviving in a classroom full of pupils. However, it is important to understand at this early stage the way in which these philosophical issues impinge significantly on classroom practice. So, the aims of education express intentions of individuals or groups. They are not just abstract ideas. It is important then, in order to understand educational aims fully, to ask whose aims are being expressed. As with the nature of mathematics, this is no universal agreement or happy consensus. This is because different groups can and do have different sets of values. Values which are in turn rooted in different world views or belief systems. These are, however, some broad categories that help to illuminate the area of educational aims. These are indicated in the following discussions, which presents a simplified categorization of the possible purposes for education. Each of these areas of development has, at some time within the history of mathematics education, been the focus of concern for different groups. Considering your aims for education is a further important part of clarifying the values that will inform your mathematics teaching. So the first aim of education is academic development. Education should help pupils to develop a thorough knowledge and understanding of each subject. At the same time, pupils are encouraged to form appropriate attitudes towards it. The desired outcome is sufficient people inducted into the academic community, including an adequate supply of good teachers at all levels. This is to guarantee each subject's place within our cultural heritage and its future development. Next, the next aim of education is vocational development. Education should provide pupils with the relevant knowledge and skills that they need in the world of work. The desired outcome is suitably equipped workforce ready to adapt to the needs of growing economy. Then, Personal development. Education should provide opportunity for the all-round development of the individual. The desired outcome is fulfilled in autonomous people who have a well-developed self-awareness and who continue to grow and mature in adult life. And the last one is the social development. Education should provide a forum within which pupils can develop socially and find their roles within society. The desired outcome is individuals who will be confident in their interpersonal relationship and in their role as critical citizens. Meaning, as mathematics teachers, or you as future mathematics teachers, your role is to develop our students holistically, to provide them education which will develop them academically, vocationally, personally, and socially. And most importantly, you have to give them or to teach them how to develop their values, their characters, so that they will be a productive citizen of our country. So criticisms on testing. So these are some of the criticisms on testing. Number one, tests create anxiety. There is no doubt that anxiety increases during testing. Of course, even as teachers experience anxiety or increases our anxiety when we are testing. For most students, it motivates them to perform better. For a few, test anxiety may be so great that it interferes with test performance. These typically are students who are generally anxious, and the test simply adds to their already high level of anxiety. A number of steps can be taken to reduce test anxiety, such as thoroughly preparing for the test. So to reduce the test anxiety, of course, you have to be ready and be prepared for the test. Taking practice exercises and using liberal time limits. That is the reason why when we teach mathematics, we give them practice exercises before giving the test, because it reduces the experiences of the students of becoming anxious during the exam. Fortunately, many test publishers in recent are provided, but it is still necessary to observe carefully during testing and to discount the scores of overly anxious students. So number two, test, categorize, and label students. Categorizing and labeling individuals can be a serious problem. So sometimes we categorize these students are the intelligent ones, these students are the low performing ones. Sometimes when we label and categorize our students, it's no good for them. So particularly when those labels are used as an excuse for poor student achievement rather than means of providing the extra services and help to ensure better achievement. It is all too easy to place individuals in pigeonholes and apply labels that determine, at least in part, how they are viewed, treated. Classifying students in terms of levels of mental ability has probably caused the greatest concerns in education. When students are classified as mentally retarded, for example, it influences how teachers and peers view them, how they view themselves and the school programs they receive. When students are mislabeled as mentally retarded, and has been in the case with some racial and ethnic minorities, the problem is compounded. At least some of the support for mainstreaming handicapped students has come from the desire to avoid the categorizing and labeling the accompanies special education classes. So when you become a teacher already, do not label your students bobo, or whatever word you may label it, because it adds uh, it adds difficulty to them to learn mathematics. Instead, you just treat them normally. You just treat them equally. So the next one is test damage student self-concept. This is a concern that requires the attention of teachers, counselors, and other users of tests. The improper use of tests may indeed contribute to distorted self-concepts. The stereotyping of students. One, misuse of tests that is unlikely to have an undesirable influence on a student's self-concept. Another is the inadequate interpretation of test scores that may cause students to make unwarranted generalizations from the results. It is certainly discouraging to review low scores on tests, and it is easy to see how students might develop a general sense of failure unless the results are properly interpreted. Low-scoring students need to be made aware that aptitude achievement tests are limited measures and that the results can change. In addition, the possibility of overgeneralizing from low test scores will be lessened if the student's positive accomplishments and characteristics are mentioned during the interpretation. When properly interpreted and used, tests can help students develop a realistic understanding of the strengths and weaknesses and thereby contribute to improved learning and positive image. So the next criticism on testing is this criticism or test creates self-fulfilling prophecy. This criticism has been directed primarily toward intelligence or scholastic aptitude tests. The argument is that test scores create teacher expectations concerning the achievement of individual students. The teacher then teaches in accordance with those expectations, and the students respond by achieving to their expected level. A self-fulfilling prophecy. Thus, those who are expected to achieve more do achieve more, and those who are expected to achieve less do achieve less. This is so-called Pygmalion effect receives strong support from a widely heralded study by Rosenthal and Jacobsen of 1968. Even though the student was later challenged by other researchers, Elshoff and Snow 1971, West and Anderson in 1976. The belief that teachers' expectations enhance or hinder a student's achievement is widely held, and the role of testing on creating these expectations is certainly worthy of further research. So the spiral versus age-specific curriculum. At this point in time, we are already using the spiral approach curriculum in the basic education. So there has been much debate both nationally and internationally as to whether to use spiral curriculum or age-specific standards. So your task is to determine which of the two is to be used. Which is better? Is it the spiral or the age-specific curriculum? Those in favor of age-specific standards believe it is important to make clear the expected minimum standards for all pupils of particular ages, specifically in core areas of the curriculum such as arithmetic. They also concerned that a single scale implies that all pupils have to follow the same path at different rates, and that for many this will lead to unsatisfactory experience. They believe that consequently there will be little opportunity for pupils to take mathematics courses that have a sense of unity and completeness, as well as being relevant to pupils' future study. While those in favor of the spiral curriculum believe they offer a clearer progression for pupils throughout their schooling. This, they consider, is particularly helpful in improving continuity for pupils as they move between phases of schooling, such as at primary, secondary transfer. They are also concerned that having age-specific standards will lead them to an emphasis on many pupils achieving the minimum standard and so could well result in limitations on the most available, able or little reward for the least able. How to assess pupils against performance standards. If performance standards are established within a curriculum, then it is with the expectation that some assessment of pupils' performance against these standards will take place. The particular requirements for carrying out this assessment vary between different national systems. In all cases, however, there is an expectation that teachers will assess their own pupils against the standards. This is supported in various ways. In some countries, example questions and tasks are provided for teachers to use when they think they are appropriate. Another approach is for teachers to provide annotated examples of pupils' work, indicating which standard or level they demonstrate. And a third method is to use national tests, either optional or compulsory. To assess pupils, although assessment by teachers can arguably be tailored towards the needs and abilities of individual pupils, it is open to claims of bias. Also, unless the data are collected together, it does not provide any indication of system-wide standards. How about the mathematical processes and applications? So this figure is a 3 dimensions of applying mathematics from ATM. So the question of how best to teach the use and application of mathematics has always been a continuous, contentious one. Should the skills associated with the posing and solving of problems be taught discretely or alongside skills such as how to find the area of a circle or how to multiply decimals? It is even possible to unpack mathematical competence into an ordered list of skills that can be presented in the classroom and subsequently assessed. The presentation and interpretation of this aspect of the mathematics curriculum has been problematic since it was first introduced. The current curriculum holds that it should be viewed as both separate as in the first attainment target, mathematical processes and applications, and embedded. One helpful way to think about this embedded relationship is to consider the 3 dimensions of any use or application of mathematics. The first is the context within which mathematics is deployed. The second is the mathematical process that are to be used, and the third is the mathematical content or concepts and facts, techniques that is employed. Okay. So let us take a look at this concept. At this figure. The first dimension in the application of mathematics, the second dimension involves the processes employed when people use mathematics, and the third dimension is the mathematical content. Which includes the various mathematical concepts, facts, and techniques that are to be taught. So, pupils' calculation method. Although the programs of study for each of the curriculum areas are very brief, they contain a number of important issues that you will need to address as a classroom teacher. For example, within the number and algebra, there is reference to making calculations. Taking as a whole, the curriculum encourages the use of mental methods, estimation and approximation, and the use of calculators as well as written methods. Change in assessment. Throughout most of the 20th century, the classroom assessment was considered a mechanism for providing an index of learning, and it followed a predictable pattern. Teachers taught, tested the students' knowledge of the material, made judgments about the students' achievement based on the testing, and then move on to the next unit of work. More recently, however, this approach to assessment has come into question as societal expectations for schooling have changed. Cognitive science has provided new insights into the nature of learning and the traditional role of assessment in motivating student learning has been challenged. In the past, schooling beyond basic skills and knowledge was viewed as required by only a few, but now, high school graduation is considered a necessity for all, and the education community is being asked to ensure that graduates be proficient in complex critical thinking, problem solving, and effective communication to meet demanding societal, economical, and technological challenges. Learning was long thought to be an accumulation of automized bits of knowledge that are sequenced, hierarchical, and need to be explicitly taught and reinforced. Learning is now viewed as a process of constructing understanding during which individuals attempt to connect new information to what they already know, so that ideas have some personal coherence. Individuals construct this understanding in many different ways, depending on their interests, experience, and learning styles. Educators have traditionally relied on assessment that compares students with more successful peers as a means to motivate students to learn, but recent research suggests students will likely to be motivated and confident learners when they experience progress and achievement, rather than the failure and defeat associated with being compared to more successful peers. Stiggins, 2001. And these three changes in societal expectations and in knowledge about learning and motivation have strong implications for how teachers teach what they teach, and especially how they apply classroom assessment practices. Okay, so this time let's discuss classroom assessment and societal change. Formal and informal assessment of learning has always been part of educational institution. With the advent of universal schooling at the turn of the 20th century, children were expected to attend school to learn basic skills. Assessment was the mechanism for making decisions about future programs and for providing information to parents about their children's learning. At the middle of the 20th century, it became clear that schooling was an important key to social mobility and that achievement in school was the basis for entry into the workplace. Tests and exams took on major importance in deciding which students would have access to higher education. Many jurisdictions instituted standardized testing programs alongside classroom assessment to ensure fair, accurate, and consistent opportunities for students. Since the 1960s and 1970s, the purposes for classroom assessment have expanded. The terms formative assessment and summative assessment enter the language of educators. Formative assessment being assessment that takes place during teaching to make adjustment to the teaching process, and summative assessment being assessment at the end of a unit or term to convey student progress. In order to fulfill these two purposes, educators extended their assessment practices and began assessing a wider range of student work such as practical tasks, coursework, projects, and presentations. For the most part, however, assessment was still a matter of making statements about students' weaknesses and strengths. More recently, the focus in educational policy has been on preparing all students for tomorrow's world. At the same time, the expectation for students have increased in breadth and depth, dramatically affecting teachers' instructional and assessment roles, and student roles as learners. So, the effects of classroom assessment on learning. There is considerable evidence that assessment is a powerful process for enhancing learning. Black and William, 1998, synthesized over 250 studies linking assessment and learning and found that the international use of assessment in the classroom to promote learning improves student achievement. Increasing the amount of time on assessment, however, does not necessarily enhance learning. Rather, when teachers use classroom assessment to become aware of the knowledge, skills, and beliefs that their students bring to a learning task, use this knowledge as starting point for new instruction, and monitor students' changing perceptions as instruction proceeds. Classroom assessment promotes learning. When learning is the goal, teachers and students collaborate and use ongoing assessment and pertinent feedback to move learning forward. When classroom assessment is frequent and varied, teachers can learn a great deal about their students. They can gain an understanding of students' existing beliefs and knowledge and can identify incomplete understandings, false beliefs, and naive interpretations of concepts that may influence or distort learning. Teachers can observe and probe students' thinking over time and can identify links between prior knowledge and new learning. Learning is also enhanced when students are encouraged to think about their own learning, to review their experiences of learning, and to apply what they have learned to their future learning. Assessment provides the feedback loop for this process. When students and teachers become comfortable with a continuous cycle of feedback and adjustment, learning becomes more efficient and students begin to internalize the process of understanding their own learning and considering it against a range of criteria, not just the teacher's judgment about quality or accuracy. So, classroom assessment and its effects on motivation. Motivation is essential for the hard work of learning. The higher the motivation, the more time and energy a student is willing to devote to any given task. Even when a student finds the content interesting and the activity enjoyable, learning requires sustained concentration and effort. Past views of motivation were heavily influenced by the behaviorist psychology of the 1960s and 1970s, in which a schedule of rewards and punishments led to either reinforcing or extinguishing a particular behavior. It was believed that assessment and grading motivated students to work hard and to learn. It is now understood that the relationship between grades and motivation is neither simple nor predictable. Grades have been found to be motivating for some students and demotivating for others. Students who generally do well are often motivated by the likelihood of success and praise that accompanies doing well. Students who typically do not do well may choose to avoid the likelihood of a failure by devaluing the assessment process and even school. Using classroom assessment for differentiating learning. For differentiated learning. Classes consist of students with different needs, backgrounds, and skills. Each student's learning is unique The context of classroom, schools, and communities vary. As well, the societal pressure for more complex learning for all students' necessities. As well, the societal pressure for more complex learning for all students necessitates the teachers find ways to learn as much as they can, as deeply as they can, and as efficiently as they can. Many jurisdictions have moved toward differentiated instruction from the one-size-fits-all emphasis on the whole class to identify the unique learning patterns of each student, using various instructional approaches to accommodate the range of learning patterns and styles, including designing instruction for students with various learning challenges and disabilities. Then we move on to the quality in classroom assessment. Classroom assessment involves a complex process requiring teachers' professional judgment. Teachers decide how to assess, what to assess, and when to assess. They also interpret the students' learning according to reference points for success, such as curricular learning outcomes. The inferences about students' learning the teachers make need to be credible, fair, free from bias, and connected to their intended purposes. Assessment is fundamentally a measurement process subject to the principles of measurement. Measurement as it is used here is defined in the broadest sense of determining the degree of something. In order to make the right decisions about students, it is necessary that teachers adhere to these basic measurement principles. There are 4 basic principles or quality issues that are important in classroom assessment. So these are the reliability, reference points, validity, and record keeping. Let us discuss it one by one. Reliability. In classroom assessment, the reliability addresses the questions, how sure am I? How confident am I that this assessment process provides enough consistent and stable information to allow me to make statements about a student's learning with certainty? When teachers make statements about students' learning, they are making inferences about what students know and can do from the evidence that is available to them through assessment. If the assessment process is reliable, the inferences about a student's learning should be similar when they are made by different teachers. When the learning is measured using various methods, or when students demonstrate their learning at different times. If teachers are unsure about whether the inferences would be consistent under all these conditions, this is a question about reliability. When there is any doubt, there is probably not yet enough information to make a reliable statements. There are many ways to promote reliability. This is one. Teachers can use a variety of assessment tasks to provide a range of information. The more information gathered, the clearer is the picture of a student's learning profile. The next one is the reference points. The interpretation of any kind of measurement depends on reference points. When carpenters measure distance, they use meters and centimeters. Meteorologists refer to temperature in relation to the freezing point of water. Restaurant reviewers rate the food in restaurants based on quality, originality, and presentation. In classroom assessment, there are 3 reference points teachers use when considering a student's performance. Number 1, how is the student performing in relation to some predetermined criteria, learning outcome, or expectation? How is the student perform in relation to the performance of other students in the defined group? And how is the student performing in relation to his or her performance at a prior time? If all 3 of these reference points are used together and the distinctions among them are blurred, the resulting score of statement of learning does not provide clear information about the nature or quality of the specific learning. Next, validity and record keeping. Validity in classroom assessment is about the accuracy of the interpretation and the use of assessment information. How well does the assessment measure what I'm trying to measure? Does the interpretation of the result lead to appropriate conclusions and consequences? When thinking about validity, we focus on the inferences that are drawn from assessment and the consequences of these inferences for those who have been assessed. When an assessment is misinterpreted or used for purposes that were not intended, the result may be poor decisions and problematic consequences. Validity of classroom assessment depends on analyzing the intended learning and all its embedded elements, having a good match among the assessment approaches, the intended learning and the decisions that teachers and students make about the learning, also ensuring that the assessment adequately covers the targeted learning outcomes, including content, thinking processes, skills, and attitudes. And then providing students with opportunities to show their knowledge of concepts in many different ways. Examples: using a range of assessment approaches and with multiple measures to establish a composite picture of student learning. While high-quality record keeping is critical for ensuring quality in classroom assessment, the records that the teachers and students keep are the evidence that support the decisions that are made about students' learning. The record should include detailed and descriptive information about the nature of the expected learning as well as evidence of students' learning and should be collected from a range of assessment. This time, let's have the purposes of classroom assessment. By the way, there are three different purposes. Number one is the assessment for learning. It is designed to give teachers information to modify and differentiate teaching and learning activities. It acknowledges that individual students learn in idiosyncratic ways. But it also recognizes that there are predictable patterns and pathways that many students follow. It requires careful designs on the part of teachers so that they use the resulting information to determine not only what students know, but also to gain insights into how, when, and whether students apply what they know. Teachers can also use this information to streamline and target instruction and resources and to provide feedback to students to help them advance their learning. The next purpose of classroom assessment is the assessment as learning. Assessment as learning is a process of developing and supporting metacognition for students. Assessment as learning focuses on the role of the student as the critical connector between assessment and learning. When students are active, engaged, and critical assessors, they make sense of information, relate it to prior knowledge, and use it for new learning. This is the regulatory process in metacognition. It occurs when students monitor their own learning and use the feedback from this monitoring to make adjustments, adaptations, and even major changes in what they understand. It requires the teachers help students develop practice and become comfortable with reflection and with a critical analysis of their own learning. And then the last one is the assessment of learning. Assessment of learning is summative in nature and is used to confirm what students know and can do, to demonstrate whether they have achieved the curriculum outcomes, and occasionally to show how they are placed in relation to others. Teachers concentrate on ensuring that they have used assessment to provide accurate and sound statements of students' proficiency, so that the recipients of the information can use the information to make and defensible decisions. So these are the purposes of classroom assessment. Assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment as assessment of learning. So for, as, and of. Now, we move on to the planning, the assessment process, and reporting. Careful planning is required to ensure that there are logical connections among the purpose, methods, and use of the results. Classroom assessment is planned in relation to purpose and in alignment with curriculum and instruction. Curriculum, assessment, instruction, and learning are interconnected and interact in an interactive and sometimes cyclical process. All four need to be aligned and coherent for the learning to be effective and meaningful. The process of planning is what provides a blueprint that centers on the purpose, makes the connections explicit, and creates a coherent organizational structure. Against this blueprint, teachers can constantly question their strategies. Are my strategies still appropriate and aligned? Do I need to make adjustments or perhaps even shift decision? Although teachers do not need to adhere strictly to their plans, without proper planning, it is difficult to ensure balance and coherence. The fundamental purpose of reporting is to enable parents and students to understand the student's performance at a specific point in time and to decide what is required for future progress. More complex forms of classroom assessment require new ways of reporting. These new ways need to include both a frame of reference and sufficient information so that an outsider can make sense of the information. Suggestions should be included about how the information would be used to help make reasoned judgments. The report should clearly state purpose and learning outcomes and should present an accurate profile of a student in relation to this. G. Wiggins suggests that reporting be outcome-based, honest yet fair, rich in context, and user-friendly. This kind of reporting explicitly identifies the purposes of the assessment. Number 1, provides sufficient context and points of reference to make interpretation reasonable. Uses a variety of descriptors and symbols, examples, letter or percent grades. So here in the Philippines, in the basic ed, we are using numbers, numerical grades that have clear, agreed upon, and stable meaning, provides rich, detailed information and evidence, and not just a single grade. So assessment toolkit. The variety of methods available for collecting, interpreting, and reporting information about what students know and can do is endless. And there are many excellent resources for teachers. So these are the assessment toolkit. Number 1, gathering information. You can use the following. Questioning, asking focused questions in class to elicit understanding, or observation. So number 1 is questioning, number 2 is observation. Systematic observations of students as they process ideas. Number 3, homework. Assignments to elicit understanding, learning conventions, or interviews, because it investigates discussions with students about their understanding and conclusions. Number 5, demonstrations or presentations. So opportunities for students to show their learning in oral and media performances or exhibitions. Next, number 6, quizzes, tests, examinations, opportunities for students to show their learning through written response. Then next number, rich assessment tasks. Complex tasks that encourages students to show connections that they are making among concepts they are learning. Example of this is project making. You can also use computer-based assessment, systematic and adaptive software application connected to curriculum outcomes. You may also use simulations, docudramas, learning logs, projects, and investigations. So another assessment toolkit is interpreting information. So under interpreting information, you can have developmental continuum. You can also have checklists, rubrics, reflective journals, self-assessment, and peer assessment. Next, you can also have record keeping. So sample of record keeping are anecdotal records, so student profiles, video or audio tapes, photographs, and portfolio. Portfolio is a record keeping. And then the last one is communicating. So demonstrations or presentations are also under communicating. Parent, student, teacher conferences, records of achievement, report cards, learning and assessment, assessment newsletters. So all of these are under assessment toolkit. So what is assessment for learning? Assessment for this is an in-depth discussion on the assessment for learning. Assessment for learning occurs throughout the learning process. It is designed to make each student's understanding visible so that teachers can decide what they can do to help students progress. Assessment for learning occurs throughout the learning process. It is interactive with teachers, aligning instruction with the targeted outcomes, identifying particular learning needs of students or groups, selecting and adapting materials and resources, creating differentiated teaching strategies and learning opportunities for helping individual students move forward in their learning, and providing immediate feedback and information to students. Teachers also use assessment for learning to enhance students' motivation and commitment to learning. When teachers commit to learning as the focus of assessment, they change the classroom culture to one of student success. They make visible what students believe to be true and use the information to help students move forward in manageable, efficient, and respectful ways. How about this question? What is assessment as learning? Assessment as learning focuses on students and emphasizes assessment as a process of metacognition. So metacognition meaning knowledge of one's own thought processes for students. Assessment as learning emerges from the idea that the learning is not just a matter of transferring ideas from someone who is knowledgeable to someone who is not, but it is an active process of cognitive restructuring that occurs when individuals interact with new ideas. Within this view of learning, students are the critical connectors between assessment and learning. For students to be actively engaged in creating their own understanding, they must learn to be critical assessors who make sense of information, relate it to prior knowledge, and use it for new learning. The ultimate goal of assessment as learning is for students to acquire the skills and the habits of mind to be metacognitively aware with increasing independence. Assessment as learning focuses on the explicit fostering of students' capacity over time to be their own best assessors. But teachers need to start by presenting and modeling external structured opportunities for students to assess themselves. Then the next question is, what is assessment of learning? The last one. So as the discussion goes by, you can now differentiate the difference of the three purposes of assessment. Okay. Assessment of learning is the assessment that becomes public and results in statements or symbols about how well students are learning. It often contributes to pivotal decisions that will affect students' future. It is important then that the underlying logic and measurement of assessment of learning be credible and defensible, because the consequences of assessment of learning are often far-reaching and affect students seriously. Teachers have the responsibility of reporting student learning accurately and fairly based on evidence obtained from a variety of contexts and applications. Effective assessment of learning requires the teachers provide a rationale for undertaking a particular assessment of learning at a particular point in time. Okay, this time let's have the in-class assessment. In-class or ongoing assessment might include gathering evidence in various ways of what pupils can do and understand. Sometimes the evidence you obtain is in a permanent form that can be reviewed again later, such as written work recorded in the pupil's exercise book. However, the evidence can often be ephemeral, such as when you observe pupil choosing to use a ruler to measure appropriately, or when you overhear one pupil explain her reasoning to another. The list below summarizes some forms of evidence that are important in the in-class assessment of mathematics. Number 1, making exercises. Number 2, class tests and quizzes. Number 3, open and extended activities and ICT work. Number 4, questioning, both open and closed questions, and observation. So extended work in mathematics. To appreciate fully what your pupils can achieve in using the process of thinking mathematically, it is important that you include opportunities for the pupils to engage with open-ended and investigational tasks from time to time, and that these are allowed to extend over several lessons. Extended work is also a very important learning experience. It is where pupils learn to take responsibility themselves for working mathematically and to make decisions about how to use mathematical skills to work productively on unfamiliar problems. Assessment of extended work can be very different from the assessment of exercises and tests. Mathematics teachers usually assess extended work by outcome. This involves judging the pupil's level of achievement by the work attempted and by what specific examples and generalizations the pupil has discussed. Higher level attainment will include some explanation, justification, and perhaps proof of the generalizations made. Oral assessment, questioning, and observing. The use of effective oral questioning is the second aspect of effective in-class assessment. Some questions are more effective than others at giving you opportunities for assessment. Through questioning, you can find out what pupils know, understand, and can do. You can also explore pupils' misconceptions and help them to learn to ask effective questions of themselves. When you ask questions, it is important that you allow the pupils thinking time to consider the question before you seek an answer. Providing appropriate feedback for pupils. When you mark a pupil's work, you need to consider what to tell them about how they have done and how to present the information. Hindi basta nag-grade na lang. It is helpful to think about what types of feedback are available and when each might be appropriate. Consider under what circumstances it would be appropriate simply to give 9 out of 10 as the feedback on pupils' work. There should be a justification all of the time. Tests and quizzes. In order to help pupils become fluent in using some aspects of mathematical learning, teachers often use oral assessment or quizzes and tests. In such tests, pupils are given spoken instructions and questions and are usually required to interpret the problems posed without further written information. Recording the progress. So it's very important that we record the progress of our students. Teachers are required to keep records of each pupil's progress. Many schools ask their teachers to make interim assessment during the grading period in order to keep track of pupil progress. So, as teachers, it's very important that you have your class record. Therefore, teachers may be asked to make an assessment of the curriculum level that each of their pupils has attained. Reporting to parents. Parents are often particularly concerned about how their child is progressing in mathematics. Your school and your mathematics department will have established practices for producing regular reports to parents. This will usually include a program of parental consultations in which parents have the opportunity to meet teachers as well as regular written reports on each school subject. These practices will often be formalized as part of the school and departmental policies for assessment. Recording and reporting. It is important that you learn to use the established framework to communicate effectively with parents in writing comments on both day-to-day learning in books and on formal reports. You can aim to encourage dialogue among parent or guardian, pupil, and yourself about the pupil's learning. So, that would be all for Unit 1 and Unit 2. If you have any questions, please feel free to send a message in our group chat, SEM15 BSE 3D. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you are okay staying in your home. Have a healthy and safe lifestyle. Hope to see you soon, future mathematicians.